Picture this. You're in a dream, standing inside a massive cathedral. But instead of stained glass, the walls are made of mirrors. And when you look into them, you don't see your own reflection. You see the pain of every person you've ever loved. You see a child crying, a mother screaming, a broken man who speaks with your voice. You search desperately for your own face, but the deeper you look, the more you seem to fade away. Maybe that's not just a dream. Maybe it's a memory. You've always had this ability, this knack for feeling what other people won't say out loud. You can sense the rage simmering behind their smiles, the deep grief hidden in their jokes. You call it empathy. They call you kind, a good listener, an old soul. But has anyone ever stopped to ask what this is actually doing to you? What if this gift of yours isn't a gift at all? What if it's a survival reflex? A skill you had to master in childhood rooms where silence was deafening and love always came with strings attached? What if empathy wasn't something you were born with, but something you had to become just to feel safe? And now, as an adult, you carry sorrows that don't belong to you. You bleed for people who never even asked you to. You've become the mirror for everyone else, and in the process, you've forgotten the person who was supposed to be standing in front of it. This isn't just compassion. This is what you might call psychic exposure. It's like being possessed by a pain that isn't even yours. The famous psychologist Carl Jung put it perfectly. What you failed to make conscious will rule your life as fate. But this thing you're experiencing, it's not fate. It's a pattern, it's a haunting, and it's a warning. If you don't find the right name for it, you'll just keep calling it love. People call you gifted, sensitive, a natural healer. But what if those exact qualities are what make you the perfect prey? You see, for people like you, for empaths, the world isn't something you just walk through. You absorb it. Every glance, every shift in tone, every flicker of emotion from the people around you courses through your nervous system like electricity through a wire. But this incredible sensitivity, this wide-open channel, doesn't just attract kindness and light, it also attracts predators. In a world full of manipulators, your empathy isn't a shield, it's bait. Those who have no empathy of their own, the narcissists, the manipulators, the emotional parasites, are drawn to you like wolves to an open wound. They watch you, they study your softness. They listen to the gentle way you speak. They notice how quickly you forgive, and they see how deeply you care. But they don't see a person, they see a resource. To them, you aren't a soul to connect with. You are a source of what's often called psychic fuel. Take the classic narcissist, for example. They aren't just egotistical. At their core, they are profoundly empty. They have to pull energy from other people just to survive, and you, the empath, offer it up freely. You absorb their rage. You take the blame for their chaos. You find yourself comforting them right after they've hurt you. And you don't do this because you're weak. You do it because your nervous system was conditioned, long ago, to prioritize keeping the peace over protecting yourself. This is how the unconscious contract gets signed. You pour your energy into their shadow, into their darkness, and in return, they give you an illusion of meaning, a feeling of connection, a sense of being desperately needed. But it's not a real relationship. It's a transaction, and you're the one paying the price. Carl Jung warned about this. He said the unconscious doesn't play fair. It only seeks energy. And when you're not aware of your own psychic boundaries, your empathy becomes an open invitation to be used. You become the battery that powers someone else's life. Their unresolved anger turns into your anxiety. Their wounded inner child becomes your personal project to fix. Their guilt becomes your identity. And by the time you look up, you've built your entire sense of self around someone else's damage. This is the empath's paradox. You keep attracting the very wounds you're still carrying from your own past. You call it a deep connection, but really, It's a reenactment. It's your unconscious trying to fix the past, believing that if you can just heal them, then maybe, this time, someone will finally choose to heal you. But they won't, because they don't want to be healed. They want to be fed. And if you're not conscious of this dynamic, you become the meal. We live in a culture that loves to romanticize sensitivity. You've seen it all over social media. Empathy gets praised in those pastel-colored Instagram posts, celebrated like it's a superpower. But there's a brutal truth that nobody ever posts about. Empathy, without self-awareness, isn't kindness. It's self-destruction. Real, raw, unfiltered empathy isn't some gentle, floating feeling. It can feel violent. Not violent toward others, but violent toward yourself. Because when you feel absolutely everything, but have no idea why you're feeling it, you stop being a person and you start becoming a sponge. You take on pain that isn't yours. You absorb other people's dysfunction and call it compassion. And slowly, bit by bit, your own sense of self starts to rot from the inside out. Here's the part they never tell you. Empaths don't just feel other people's emotions, they merge with them. And that merging, when you're not conscious of it, leads to a kind of psychic enmeshment. You're no longer just feeling for someone. You're carrying their emotional ghosts around in your own nervous system, and you probably don't even realize it. You suddenly find yourself feeling deeply sad, but it's not your sadness. You feel a wave of anxiety, but nothing has happened to you. You feel this incredible weight on your shoulders. But that weight doesn't have your name on it. This isn't healing. This is possession. According to Jung, the unconscious is a living, breathing force. It doesn't knock politely on the door. It seeps in through every little crack in your identity, every unexamined belief, every boundary you were never taught you were allowed to have. This is how shadow projection works. Someone who has repressed their own rage meets you, and they unconsciously dump that rage into your energy field. It's not usually malicious. It's a psychic reflex. But if you're unaware, if you're unguarded, if you've never learned what your own energy feels like separate from others, you'll absorb it, you'll carry it, you'll cry over it, and you'll believe it's yours. You'll end up apologizing for moods you didn't create, trying to fix problems that were never yours to solve, and completely losing yourself while trying to help everyone else find their way. This is the dark side of empathy, the one nobody wants to admit because it's not beautiful or poetic. It's brutal, it's lonely, and it leaves you with one terrifying question. Who am I when nobody needs saving? Carl Jung didn't really talk about empaths in the way we do now, with all the modern labels. He used a different term, psychic permeability. He wrote about individuals who weren't just emotionally in tune with others, but were completely, psychically wide open to the collective unconscious, often without even knowing it. He warned that the unconscious isn't just your personal stuff, it's archetypal, it's ancient, and it's always looking for a way to express itself. In Jungian terms, the empath isn't just sensitive. They are an unwitting vessel, a carrier for the unloved, rejected parts of other people. And this is where it gets dangerous, because archetypes aren't just cool metaphors you read about in books. They are ancient, autonomous patterns of energy that live deep beneath your personality. Think of them like primal software. The mother, the child, the shadow, the savior, the trickster. These forces don't ask for your permission. They enter through your emotions, through repetitive patterns, through your unhealed trauma. So when someone else disowns a powerful part of themselves, when they repress their rage, their fear, their guilt, that energy doesn't just disappear. It has to go somewhere. It spills out and seeks a new home. The unconscious wants to be felt, and the empath is always available, open, porous, and ready to feel. So, the unloved rage from one person finds a home in your nervous system. The grief someone else refused to mourn finds tears in your eyes. The shame they buried becomes a silent, heavy pressure in your chest. This is what it means to carry ghosts. It never announces itself. It just creeps in like a fog, blurring the line between what is yours and what belongs to someone else. All of a sudden, you're exhausted after a simple phone call. You start avoiding crowded rooms because they feel overwhelming. You find yourself crying when nothing sad has even happened. You're not just feeling with people anymore. You're feeling as them. That isn't empathy. That's what you could call archetypal contamination. And it comes with a cost. Empathy isn't always an act of pure love. Sometimes it's an unconscious performance. And behind that performance are these ancient archetypes that slip into your psyche and wear your identity like a mask. The most seductive of these is the archetype of Chiron, the wounded healer. In Greek mythology, Chiron was an immortal centaur who was a brilliant teacher and healer to the gods and heroes. But he carried a wound that, despite all his wisdom, could never be healed. This is exactly what happens when you build your identity around fixing other people's pain. You serve, you guide, you heal, but underneath it all, you're constantly bleeding. You've convinced yourself that your suffering is just the price you have to pay for your purpose. Then you have the martyr. This is the one who sacrifices everything and calls it a virtue. You cancel your own plans, you abandon your own needs. You drown yourself in other people's emotional chaos, and you feel morally superior for doing it. But it's not sainthood. It's self-erasure, dressed up to look like compassion. Next is the savior, the empath who is addicted to fixing people. You seek out broken individuals like they're fascinating puzzles, believing that your love is the special ingredient that will finally save them. And when they inevitably hurt you, you call it a lesson. You stay, you try harder, because somewhere deep down, you've confused being needed with being chosen. And finally, you have the most dangerous one of all, the puppet. This is the empath who has become so tangled up in other people's emotions that they're no longer acting from their own free will. They feel what others feel, want what others want. Their strings are pulled by unspoken moods, guilt trips, and expectations. They are performing empathy, but they've lost their own sovereignty in the process. Each of these archetypes distorts what empathy is supposed to be. It stops being an act of genuine presence and becomes a role, a mask, an addiction. Because when your sense of worth is tied to how much pain you can hold for others, you will unconsciously keep seeking out pain just to feel valuable. This isn't compassion, it's being trapped by a myth. And until you can name the archetype that's moving through you, you can't begin to reclaim yourself. Now here's a tough question. What if not every empath is a victim? What if some are unconsciously the ones in control? When you don't heal that deep-seated part of you that needs to be needed, your empathy can warp into something else entirely. It becomes a strategy, a performance, a subtle hidden form of power. You tell yourself you're just helping, but if you're honest, you're really holding the emotional leash. You give advice nobody asked for. You jump in to fix people who didn't ask to be fixed. You listen with this intense, laser-focused compassion, but then you feel deeply betrayed when they don't take your advice or change their lives. That's not empathy. That's control, masquerading as care. You've learned to play the role of the savior so well that you don't even notice when you're bulldozing over their boundaries, because you've convinced yourself you're doing it out of love. But sometimes, love is just a prettier costume for fear. Fear of being abandoned. Fear of becoming irrelevant. Fear that if you're not actively helping someone, you have no value. And so you overgive, you overfeel, you overfunction. Not really for them, but for you. Helping becomes a way to hide. Care becomes a way to control. empathy becomes a currency you trade. You offer your emotional labor in exchange for a feeling of closeness. You absorb their pain in exchange for a sense of worth. You make yourself absolutely essential in their lives, and then you wonder why you feel so crushed when they lean on you until you finally collapse. This is the trap of spiritual codependency. Your identity isn't built on genuine connection. It's built on a series of emotional transactions. You're not being loved. You're being used. And then you're thanked for it. And that thank you becomes your drug. If you're really honest with yourself, there's a part of you that feels powerful being the one who gets it, the one who understands, the one everyone runs to for comfort and clarity. But that power is incredibly fragile, because the moment someone sets a boundary with you, the moment they say, "I've got this," you feel abandoned, you feel punished, you feel erased. And that's the moment you realize your empathy wasn't unconditional. It came with invisible strings attached. Until you're brave enough to face this shadow side, you will keep confusing control for compassion and performance for purpose. Dreams don't lie. They don't flatter you or try to romanticize your suffering in the way your ego does. They show you the raw, unfiltered truth that your waking mind is too afraid to admit. One man dreamed he was standing in a dark cave. All around him, he could hear the voices of people he had loved and lost. A small child was clinging to his leg, a bleeding stranger sat at his feet, and a woman reached out from the shadows, her hands trembling. He tried to run, but his feet were stuck, rooted to the cave floor. And then a whisper echoed from the darkness. "You built this temple." He woke up sobbing, not from fear, but from a sudden, gut-wrenching understanding. He realized he had built his entire identity around carrying other people's pain. He didn't just feel for them, he had turned his own body into a shrine of their sorrow and called it his purpose. Every empath eventually reaches this point, the moment when the reflection is no longer enough, when the mirrors shatter, when a dream or a moment of crisis shakes you to your core. It's the moment when being the healer no longer feels holy, it just feels heavy. This is the descent. It's the fall from the pedestal you never even asked to stand on. It's the slow, painful unraveling of the mask you didn't even know you were wearing. To truly heal as an empath is to start peeling back every layer of your identity that was built around being needed, appreciated, or praised. It means having the courage to ask, without flinching, "Who am I when I'm not saving someone?" When you do this, you start to see it all with painful clarity. You see how often you used empathy to avoid feeling your own anger. You see how many times you softened your voice to keep a peace that was never yours to protect in the first place. You see how many relationships you clung to, not because you were truly loved, but because you were useful. And underneath all of that, you find rage. Not loud, explosive rage, but a buried, ancient, and almost sacred rage. The rage of having to carry everyone else for so long while nobody ever asked how much more you could hold. The rage of only being chosen when you were needed to fix something broken. And right next to that rage, there's something even more fragile. Fear. The fear that if you stop giving, you will simply disappear. The fear that if you draw a boundary, you'll be abandoned. The fear that if you finally say, "I can't carry this for you," no one will stick around. This is the reckoning. This is the crucible where you have to make a choice. You can either keep performing empathy, or you can start embodying your own soul. Because until you face that part of you that is terrified of not being needed, you can't find the part of you that simply is, without having to offer anything in return. This is where the savior dissolves, and the self finally begins. Empaths are always told to be open, to feel deeply, to hold space. But nobody teaches you how to hold that space without disappearing inside it. Nobody teaches you the critical difference between being present for someone and being consumed by them. This is where you learn to shift from being a sponge to becoming a vessel. Think about it. A sponge is porous and has no structure of its own. It just absorbs whatever it's put in, dirty water, sorrow, rage, until it's completely waterlogged and dripping with emotions that don't belong to it. Eventually, a sponge starts to break down and mold. But a vessel is different. A vessel has structure. It has form. It can contain what is poured into it without becoming what it carries. This is energetic mastery. It's not about building a cold wall around your heart or becoming detached. It's about developing the ability to stay rooted in your own energy, even when you're sitting right in the middle of someone else's storm. And the tool you use to do this is boundaries, not with shame, not with guilt, but with sacred clarity. Because a boundary is not an act of rejection. It is an act of recognition. It says, this is me, and that is you. It sounds like this. I feel you, but I will not become you. I can witness your pain, but I will not house it in my body. I care for you deeply, but I will not collapse for you. I will not bleed for you, but I will stand with you while you learn to heal your own wounds. And here's the paradox. The moment you stop absorbing everyone's pain is the moment you finally become a truly safe person to be around. Not because you're empty, but because you are anchored. True, powerful empathy doesn't flood the room with more emotion. It centers it. It sends the message, I'm not here to fix you. I'm not here to carry you. I'm here to be so deeply and authentically myself that I remind you how to be yourself too. That is the work. That is the upgrade. You are not here to be a sponge for the world's pain. You are here to be a vessel of presence, clear, grounded, and unshakable. Unconscious empathy is absorption. Conscious empathy is alchemy. It's the difference between drowning in someone's pain and holding the space for it to be transformed. When you're unconscious, you merge. Their grief becomes your grief. Their fear becomes your anxiety. But when your empathy becomes conscious, everything changes. You no longer carry the wound. You witness it. And in that powerful act of witnessing, you offer something far more valuable than a rescue. You offer reflection. You become a mirror. You're not absorbing the sorrow. You're illuminating it, allowing the other person to see a part of themselves more clearly, maybe for the first time. Not by fixing, not by sacrificing, but by standing in your own center and allowing their emotions to rise without swallowing you whole. The unconscious empath becomes the martyr. They bleed quietly, believing their suffering makes them worthy. But the awakened empath is something else entirely. They don't carry everyone's wounds. They don't beg to be needed. They become the mirror, still, clear, and unshaken. They reflect truth, not just trauma. And in that reflection, the person in front of you sees not just their pain, but their own power to heal. You were never meant to carry the world. You were meant to walk through it with open eyes, a steady spine, and a heart that feels deeply but no longer floods. Empathy was never the final destination. It was the threshold. It was the sacred ache that was meant to lead you back here, to yourself. Before the fire, you thought your sensitivity was something you had to manage. But now, you know it's something to be sanctified. You don't numb yourself. You honor your sensitivity. You don't rescue. You reflect. You don't collapse for others. You stand beside them. This is what it means to become whole, to finally come home, not to everyone else's needs, but to the unshakable truth of your own presence. You are not here to be haunted. You are here to be human. And in becoming fully yourself, you give everyone around you the silent permission to do the same.